Welcome to Heart of a Shepherd. We are in the book of Job, chapter 33 and 34. I've titled this devotional, Religious Zeal Without Knowledge is a Travesty. I do invite you to open your Bible with me to Job 33 and chapter 34. Well, we were introduced to Elihu in the previous devotional in chapter 32. Now, understanding that Job and his friends were his elders, he had remained silent and observed the dialogue between those men. Having failed to convince Job of his error, we read that the three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Chapter 32 and verse 1. Well, provoked by his elders' failures and incensed by Job's protest of innocence, Elihu confessed in chapter 32 he was ready to burst with his own opinion, like wine fermented in wineskins and have no vent. Now, that brings us to Job 33. Here we have Elihu's denigration of Job. Now, Elihu began with a facade of humility and conceded he was no better than Job, for he was, chapter 33, verse 6, he too was formed out of the clay. Obviously making a reference to his creation as Adam was created. Well, his humility was short-lived and soon gave way to arrogance. Elihu then accused Job of daring to reproach God and suggested the Lord had treated him as an enemy. Once again, he takes up the opinion of the other, quote, friends, who all accused Job of wrongdoing, thereby suffering God's judgment. Well, endeavoring to convict Job of folly, Elihu reminded him that he was not just, or that is, righteous, and God was sovereign. Now, Elihu went on and observed that the Almighty does not give account of any of his matters. In other words, no man has a right to question God, for he is righteous in his ways and good in his dealings with man. Chapter 33, verses 14 through 18. Now, Job's friends had argued his afflictions were God's punishment for some wickedness, and his suffering was a token of God's wrath. Chapter 33 and verse 19. Now, Elihu, however, asserted that God used pain and afflictions for his purpose and to guard men from pride. There again, we find this young man showing wisdom in a way maybe we had not even seen in the others. Now, Job's afflictions, Elihu argued, could be used by God to purge his passion for bread and dainty meat. So now we're back to judging. All of this has come upon Job, maybe because he's got a carnal desire and pleasure in rich meats. And goes on, verse 24 and then verse 28, deliver, or that is redeem him from going down to the pit. In other words, God is using troubles and trials to intervene in Job's life and stop him from going the wrong way. Well, after he invited Job to dispute anything he had said, Elihu continued his discourse and boasted, verse 33, hold to thy peace, and I shall teach thee wisdom. Once again, the pride of Elihu. Now, notice then, chapter 34, Elihu's defamation of Job. Now, though the youngest of the four men, Elihu challenged Job and his friends to attend to his indictment of that poor man, verses 1 through 4 of chapter 34. He charged Job with entertaining high opinions of himself and having a false view of God, verses 5 through 9. He also alleged Job was self-righteous, guilty of foolishly accusing the Lord of injustice. Then we find Elihu's unjust diatribe suggesting that Job believed he was wounded without transgression, that is, without any wrongdoing, or even unfairly in verse 6. He wrongly contended Job would have men believe spiritual piety gave no man advantage with God, for pleasing him, quote, profiteth a man nothing, verse 7 through 9. Now, though he mistook the cause of Job's sorrows, Elihu nevertheless stated great insights into God's attributes beginning in verse 10 through verse 30 of chapter 34. Let's consider them for a moment. In verses 10 through 12, verse 17, 19, and verse 23, Elihu declared that God is just. Also, 13 through 15, God is sovereign. And verse 20 and 24, God is almighty. He observed that the Lord is omniscient, and I quote, "For his eyes are upon the ways of man, and he seeth all his goings." Verse 22, "There is no darkness, nor shadow of death, where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves." Verse 25, "He, that is the Lord, knoweth their works." And then finally, verse 26 through 28, "The Lord is also judge of the wicked." Now, you'll notice the latter verses of Job 34 records Elihu's sharp rebuke of Job. He asked his elder, that is Job, to speak. "Speak what thou knowest." Literally, say what you think, Job. Verse 33. He accused Job of speaking without knowledge and without wisdom in verse 35. That is, Job, you don't have the wisdom or the discernment to speak. Elihu then declared his desire that, and I quote, Job would be tried unto the end. That is literally forever if he answered in the matter of wicked men. He judged, that is Elihu did, that Job addeth rebellion unto his sin and multiplieth, that is murmurs or complains, his words against God. Very strong words, a great, awful condemnation of Job, a man who had already lost everything, and yet the very one that God had said in heaven was a man of integrity. In other words, let's not be guilty of judging others based upon their circumstances. Well, here's a closing thought. Elihu demonstrated a knowledge of God's ways, his person, and his character. However, in his youthful zeal, Elihu defamed Job, whom God declared was a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Job chapter 1 and verse 8. Elihu, you see, was cruel, and he judged Job harshly, condemned him without cause. Elihu then demanded that his elders would hear and agree with his conclusion in verse 34. Rather than a friend, Elihu's words proved he was Job's adversary. In his fervor, he condemned the man God approved. Here's a warning. Zeal without knowledge is dangerous. Think about that. May you and I be students of the Word. May we also recognize that God is sovereign. He is almighty. He is omniscient. And He providentially is working out His will, His plan for our lives. If only Elihu and the other three friends had known that all that Job was suffering was because God had confidence in him. May you and I have faith in God, regardless of what we face, that we'll be faithful. God bless, and bye-bye.